Hello, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter here with another foundation paper piecing pattern for you. This week it is called the Economy Patch. It's very similar in style to last week's patch, but we introduce an extra row. So instead of the diamond in the square, we've got a square in a diamond in a square. Hope that makes sense. Just remember, obviously this is a weekly series, so please do make sure to subscribe and hit the notification icon, the little bell, to make sure that you get advised of when new videos go live. And this is part of my greater channel, gentlemancrafter.com, so do check out the other videos. They're not all sewing, there's some paper craft, there's some digital crafting, and lots of variety going on there too. Mixed media as well. Anyway, I best get on with this week's foundation paper piecing project, and I will see you at the other end. Okay, let's dive in and take a look at the economy patch. This is very similar to the diamond in the square from last week, but it has an extra row. So I've provided this as a third colour. Obviously you can mix and match these though with different colours and different styles of fabric if you want to. I've printed the multiple pattern sheet onto a piece of foundation paper, and as you can see that's quite see-through, so it helps with stitch lines and positioning your fabric. Just chopping down one so that I can show you that in this video, but obviously if you're making lots to make up a quilt or a lap quilt, something like that, you can print multiples at one time. Now the central square I'm just going to stick down with a tiny bit of fabric glue, and this is a temporary fabric glue, and position it on the back of the pattern with the wrong side facing down for the fabric. Then I'm going to position the first triangle, that's one of the smaller triangles, on the edge of the main square between 1 and 2. So remember, we're going in sequential order, so we start at 1, then we go to 2. I turn this over and then stitch along the sewing line, that's the dashed line, not the dotted line, between sections 1 and 2. I always do a lock stitch or reverse stitch at the very beginning and end, and I'm making sure not to go too much over at either end either, just because it makes it neater later on. When you're finished, take the piece out, trim the ends at both ends, and then I'll use my Teflon finger presser to just lift and fold that back into position. Now technically I didn't have to with this particular one, but if you're doing them at adjoining parts, adjoining parts, then it's best to do so because you'll be sewing over the previous piece. But as you can see, 2 and 3 are separated out by quite a distance, so that's not too much of a problem. So in this case you'll be stitching along the line between 1 and 3. Again, just position the needle at the very beginning of that stitch line, stitch all the way to the end and lock off, or just a couple of reverse stitches. When it comes to fabric choices, by the way, craft cotton does work, but it is quite flimsy. There's not such a high thread count. It will press better with the finger presser, but you might find it shifting slightly during stitching. With a quilting cotton, however, it's got a nice solid thread count. So you'll find that it does fold. It's a little bit springy until you've pressed it at the end, but it really does work well at giving you a nice crisp finish, and you don't often see through quilting fabric either. So now I'm just going through stitching along the line between section 1 and 4. And then I'll repeat that process for part 5. So then I'd be stitching between parts 1 and 5. So you'll see in the free downloadable sheet when I say the colour, the last column actually shows you the parts section, so where that particular color is going to go. So it helps you organize your pieces before you start work. That's one of the beauties of this technique. You kind of know where everything's going to go before you start, and everything gets stitched very neatly into place as you're working. So if you are a bit fussy about your results, maybe foundation paper piecing is the one for you. If you enjoy this or would like to sew along, this is number 2. I obviously started this in January 2022. You can print these out, sew along, and then upload your finished squares or projects into a Facebook group that I've got, and I will leave a link below the video on YouTube and of course on my blog. There's no rush, there's no race, there's no time limit. If you find this in 2023, 2024, and we find ourselves in another lockdown, who knows? I joke and I really don't want it to happen, but if it does, then, feel free. It'll be there as long as Facebook keeps the groups thing going. Now, I am getting my add a quarter ruler out, and I'm folding back and trimming off those little bunny ears from each section. And this again is just to keep things tidy as I work. If you're familiar with foundation paper piecing, this is a technique you'll know that actually you're doing this quite a lot while you're working, but because I've kind of calculated the parts to generally fit within the seam allowances and everything else, we're not doing too much trimming of excess fabric. So we're more focused on speed and accuracy here. If you find yourself struggling to position any of these outer triangles in the center, then just fold them together point to point, so from the 2 outer edge points together, and then just finger press in the middle, and when you open it out you'll have a nice mark that will help you position it right in the center of that stitch line. Again, just working across the stitch line, taking it nice and slow with a very tight stitch. That will help you rip away the foundation paper later on. Trimming threads, taking the pin out, and folding back. And although I have sped this video up very slightly, you can be creating a single block within, 10-15 minutes. If you're doing them in batches, you could be even quicker. So you can see if you're going to make a whole stack of these to make a quilt cover, or even just something smaller like a lap quilt, you could be working quite fast and get, what shall we say, 5 an hour, 6 an hour, maybe even 10 an hour done of an evening. So, doesn't have to be something that lasts you the whole year, unless of course you are doing a huge king size quilt, and then it probably will take you some time, but it'll be fun at least. I have included some guidance on how many squares or how many blocks you would need to make for different size projects within the download, so do make sure to check that out by heading over to my blog gentlemancrafter.com and looking for the foundation paper piecing posts. There will be one a week this year, so you shouldn't have to scroll back too far. Now when it comes to the outer rounds like this, generally sometimes that's so vague. Basically the shapes will border up against 2 or 3 shapes. So although earlier I was saying stitch between lines 1 and 2 or shapes 1 and 2, in this instance basically just look out for the stitch line between the section you are working on and the rest of the design, and that's the one you'll stitch along. As you can see there, the section that I'm working on borders 2 other triangles, sections 2 and 4. Okay, just one more triangle to go. I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier, but because of the way I get you to cut this in the suggested cutting grid on the printable download, by dividing a square into 4 triangles, then generally directional patterns shouldn't be a problem. They should align themselves to the design. But if you need to create yourself a template, just trace the section. So say, for example, section 8. Add a 1/4 inch border to each edge, so that's all 3 edges of a triangle. And then you will have a template via which you can perhaps even fussy cut something. So if you want to get a particular part of the fabric to use in that section. Somebody mentioned the Teflon Presser last week. I've had this quite some time, but I find it so much easier and quicker, and obviously less electricity, than using an iron to press things as I work. I obviously give things a final press at the end, but that's just a thing. So now I'm just trimming that block down to the solid outline, which will give us a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the edge of the block. And that will be this week's foundation paper piecing block complete. This one, again, just to remind you, is called the economy patch. Last week was the diamond in the square, so that was a single diamond in a square block. This one gives us a square within a diamond within another diamond. Does that make sense? No. A square within a diamond within a square. Anyway, obviously there's a few more that you can go on to make. So whatever you choose to do, it's entirely up to you. It's a nice little edit for you. Here's a couple that I went on to make just using some fussy cutting ideas and then using patterns and solids to give a nice decorative effect. Okay, so there we go. Another one in the bag. Don't forget, if you are going to sew along with me, whatever year it is, then you can obviously come over to my Facebook group, join and share your projects as you make them, whether that just be a single block or a finished project. Anyway, in the meantime, thanks for watching. It's always great to see you, and hopefully see you again next week.